Welcome to Season 5 of Purposeful Empathy, a show dedicated to amplifying the voices of people from around the globe who understand that the world needs more empathy and are doing something about it. Today's episode was brought to you by Grand Huron International, an on-demand coaching provider for individuals and companies. Thanks for watching the show. Enjoy.
Welcome to a new episode of Purposeful Empathy. Today, I am joined by the fabulous Maria Ross, who is a professional brand strategist, speaker, and podcast host. She is the founder of Red Slice, a consultancy that advises entrepreneurs, startups, and fast growth businesses on how to build an irresistible brand story and authentically connect with customers. She is also the author of The Empathy Edge, which I have thoroughly enjoyed reading, a book that explores why businesses need to cultivate more empathy and how empathic leaders foster more productivity and loyalty. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. This is an honor.
Great. So I always love to ask the question, if there's any backstory that drew you into the empathy vortex. So is there?
Totally. Yeah. I know you as an author probably have your own backstory too. Yes, there is a backstory as always. And it's kind of related threads. So around the time of fall of 2016, a couple of things happened. Number one was I had been noticing in recent years with my corporate clients, especially my tech clients, with my very left-brained, logical C-suite executives, they started saying in my brand workshops that they wanted their brands to be seen as empathetic. So they had always said innovative. They'd always say cutting edge. They would always say, some would even say quirky culture, but they started all saying empathetic. And so I really dove deep into that of like, well, what do you mean by empathetic? And what they really meant was they wanted to be seen as approachable. They wanted to be seen as on the same side as their customers and clients, both from a transaction standpoint, but also from a recruiting standpoint, being seen as an empathetic workplace. And I had to ask the really hard question that I have to ask all my brand clients, which is, are you actually walking your talk? If you want to say you're this thing, are you actually empathetic? Like what markers is it other than just, we think empathy as a value is a good idea, right? Mm-hmm. So that was happening. And then in the fall of 2016, there was a lot going on in the United States at the time, a lot of very contentious leadership and models going on. And while there were scandals from like business scandals to political scandals, just like really bad behavior from leaders all around. And then at the same time, here I am with my about 2.5-year-old son, trying to teach him about empathy and compassion and collaboration and reading all these great books. And it was a very disheartening time. I'm sure as a parent, you can relate, where I thought, why bother teaching him all these things? Because if he looks up at the models of success and what's getting airplay, it's not those behaviors at all. It's the opposite of those behaviors. And so I began researching if there was actually, proof that empathetic leaders and companies and brands and cultures could find success because of their empathy. And I was overjoyed to find so many examples out there and so much research and data. So I decided to compile that into a business case, if you will, that became the book. And then kind of personally, what was also happening is I had been working with a strengths coach who identified one of my top 5 strengths as empathy, which I never would have, if you had asked me that, I never would have said. I would have said like, I'm detail oriented or I'm very outgoing but so we kind of explored that. And I realized that was actually a common thread throughout my work with my clients and also just my career and what had made me successful. And so it was with that I began the journey of researching and talking about empathy as a competitive advantage.
Yeah. And so I've read the book, so I know the answers to these questions, but for those who are listening or watching, you mentioned that this book makes the business case for empathy within the culture, within leadership, within the business. But what will you say as some examples for like why empathy matters to businesses?
Well, there are a few benefits that businesses achieve and leaders achieve through empathy. One is that there is ample data out there that empathy and empathetic leaders and empathetic cultures spur innovation and productivity. So they create products their customers love. They lead on innovation They have better collaborative cultures. Their employees are more engaged and more productive. And Google did a famous study years ago, which you may have come across in your own research, where they looked at their most profitable and innovative products and looked at the makeup of those teams. And they had always been a company that believed that you had to be like the expert in computer technology or in computer science from like a very well-known school to create innovation. And what they found was that the opposite, not exactly the opposite, but that was not quite the case. It was the teams that led with empathy, communication, and collaboration that delivered some of Google's most innovative products. And the other research backs up that if you have that environment where people feel seen, heard, and valued, they can do their best work. They can take risks. They can be creative. They can actually focus on doing the job you hired them to do versus worrying about drama or whether they're going to lose their job or whether someone's going to stab them in the back or not trusting their team or their leaders. They're able to free up that mind space to innovate. And then one of the other benefits from an internal perspective is that empathetic cultures boost employee engagement. And when you have a more engaged workforce, that shows up as reduced absenteeism, reduced turnover. Some of them are willing to work longer hours for lower pay, which we don't want to make that a model, but also that translates externally to companies that have engaged workforces see 10% higher customer reviews and 20% higher sales. So it translates to a better customer experience. And then also when a company is empathetic, truly empathetic, and they're aligned with their customers, they're able to create loyalty, they boost word of mouth, they boost spend, they boost so many aspects of what it takes to be in lockstep with your customers, because your brand helps your customer or client feel like they matter. And like they're not just a transaction, but they're actually part of a community, part of a tribe. And I often talk about brand in terms of a brand is a community. Like that's what you're building when you build a brand. You're building a reputation and a community. It's not just a logo. So these companies that act with empathy in terms of their customer policies or how their employees are trained or how they communicate with the press or with their customer base, all of those things, if they're doing so with an eye towards what do our customers need and want, they are ultimately more successful than if they just sort of try to cram products and services down the market's throat.
So you've been incredibly persuasive on this, like, yes, it does matter.
Yes.
So how can companies become more empathic as a culture? And we'll talk about leadership in a sec.
Yeah, I think it's got to start with individuals, because you and I both know empathy is something that's delivered by human beings. So you can't just sort of proclaim the company is now going to be empathetic or just make it a pretty poster on your wall. It actually has to start with the leaders individually. And it actually doesn't even need to start with the leaders. It can start with these little bright spots in the organization that act with empathy and model empathy and succeed as a result. And then people look to them as an example of, oh, this is another way that I can do business. This is another way I can operate. But companies have to start with that. So how do you start with that? You start with that by hiring people for emotional intelligence, not just their resume. Are they good listeners? Are they good collaborators? Do they navigate conflict well? What do their teams say about them? And being able to be willing to, potentially, I see this a lot in Silicon Valley, not hire a quote unquote rainmaker if that person is toxic, if that person is going to like destroy the culture of the company. You have to be willing to search for the person that can be the rainmaker and shows empathy and compassion and is a confident leader in that respect. And then you have to operationalize empathy. So you have to kind of put your money where your mouth is. And that means, what are your policies? What are your procedures? What are your traditions or rituals? How are people rewarded or promoted or measured in the organization? If empathy is truly important to your organization, you have to create the environment that enables empathy to flourish and encourages empathy to flourish. So that's really, you have to start with those two inner circles, and then you can proclaim that you're an empathetic brand to the market. And it won't just be some marketing veneer. It will actually be true, because that's what's happening from the inside out. I often talk to my clients about branding from the inside out. And if you really want to be an empathetic brand in the market, it's going to require more than just like one donation to the food bank every Christmas, right? It's got to be consistent, and it's got to be genuine and believable internally so that it can be believed externally.
And I think that what you're describing right now, we're in a zeitgeist where, post-COVID, there's so many corporate refugees that are reflecting on their lives and how many hours they've spent on their job. And do they really want to work this crazy? I want to work for an organization that, where I have purpose and meaning in my life. And the millennials and Gen Z is like, won't even think of joining an organization unless they've got, some good EDI and mental health issues, like that they understand that it cannot be a toxic environment. So I think yet again, there's the business case for organizations to pay attention to what is, considered a soft skill. It's so not anymore in my mind. I'm sure in your mind, like, of course it's soft from the point of view of empathy is heartfelt, right? And it's, meant to create belonging and a sense of connection between people. I get that, but it's not sort of like a want to have. It's a crucial
It's a must have. Yeah,
it's a must have.
And to your point, that's what the incoming talent generations are demanding. And the companies that don't keep up will lose top talent to their competitors. I mean, it's as dire as that. Like, if you want your company to actually survive and not go extinct, one way or another, you're going to have figure out a way to help your leaders strengthen their empathy and actually create those empathetic cultures. And you alluded to, even policies can be seen as empathetic. So they've done studies where they've shown that policies like flex time, or, pre-pandemic remote working, or paid family leave, those are sort of perks, right? Or benefits or HR policies. But to employees, those are actually seen as empathetic policies because it helps them make work within the framework of their own lives. And that's really empathy. It's sort of like, what can we do to make things easier for you so that you can deliver your best work while you're here? Not so we can coddle you, but so that we create an environment where you thrive and you feel supported. And therefore, the sky's the limit in terms of what you're going to be able to produce for us.
Yep. Beautiful. Beautiful. So what are the traits of an empathic leader? And is that something you're just born with, or can that be cultivated and developed? And if so, how? What's on the leadership side now?
Yeah. So I did learn in my research, you're probably familiar with this, is that curiosity is the number one trait of empathic people. And it makes sense because if you're asking questions to find out what someone's point of view is, you don't have to guess what it is. You can actually ask them what their perspective is. But the good news that I also learned is that it can be quote unquote learned, barring some certain psychological disorders, which are very rare, but they've even effectively helped severely autistic children who lack empathy as a result of their disease. They've helped them embrace empathy. And so it can be learned. One of the best quotes I had was, I interviewed a woman who runs a school in Northern California, Golistan Kids. And she runs the school with a foundation of empathy, not just like, we think it's a good idea, like the curriculum, the food they eat, what the kids are involved with, how they treat each other, how the teachers treat the children. It's all about cultivating empathy so that when they grow up, they don't have to think about it. It just becomes part of their identity. They would have cognitive dissonance if they acted in any other way. And that's the ultimate goal, right? Is to create a generation of leaders who they don't need my book, right? They just operate that way. But what was great was when I spoke to her, she comes from a neuroscience background, and I asked her, can this be learned? And she said, absolutely. But as an adult, if you're preconditioned in whatever way, it has to be more of an active choice. So you actually have to choose that this is the identity you want to have, and you might have to work at it. And so I really love the analogy of the fact that empathy is a muscle. And for some people, it might have atrophied. We're all born with it. We're all born with it as human beings. But for some people, it may have atrophied. So what do you do when your muscles atrophy? You go to the gym and you work out, and you don't expect like the 6-pack abs after the first visit to the gym. You have to keep going, right? And then it becomes muscle memory. Those muscles start to get toned and stronger. And it's the same thing with empathy. But again, like per this woman's quote, it has to be an active choice. And it makes it harder when it's an active choice, because it's sort of like, if you don't grow up flossing every night, like me, you have to put effort into making that a daily habit. So that's the great news, is that we can adapt and we can build that muscle and strengthen that muscle again. And then pretty soon we find ourselves just operating from that lens, which is kind of a beautiful thing.
And so anybody who's curious about your work, you do empathic leadership, skill training, and culture building. Is that what part of your work is about?
Not as my primary work. No, I actually still do brand strategy work and brand storytelling work with teams. It's deeply rooted in empathy for your audience and your customers. But due to all of my research with the book, I now do deliver workshops and trainings on how to strengthen your empathy as a leader, how to strengthen your culture's empathy, how to strengthen your empathy as a brand. So I've kind of built that into my repertoire of workshops and keynotes and speaking that I do for organizations.
Yeah, because when I was reading your book, I mean, there's a lot of like little notes in the margins. I'm a very note taker. I noticed that there was an opportunity to download a free empathy authenticity checklist. So could you speak to that for a second? Because in tandem with that question, I'd never heard the expression empathy washing before. So I guess they're related, right?
Yeah. So let's talk about empathy washing, because that's really what I call it, is the empathy veneer in the book. And that's where, like we were saying before, you're putting like the surface paint on, like we're putting our values on our website, and one of our values says that we are empathetic. Or you do like the performative act externally, right? You put out the social memes, or you do the one philanthropic act every year. And that is really an empathy veneer. That's really a marketing veneer. And it's something where I've done in my work with brand strategy, whatever your brand attribute you're trying to achieve, again, you have to live it from the inside out. So that's actually what helps you avoid it being a veneer and helps make it genuine and authentic. Is it not just this thing we're doing once or twice to make people think that we are empathetic, right? Is this something that is in our DNA and in our bones and in our values? Are we communicating this from the moment we hire someone to the moment we close a transaction with a customer? Where is empathy operationalized in that process? So they're very high level questions that an organization can ask itself to take a look at what's going on in the organization and see, are we just paying this lip service, or do we have some deeper work we need to do? And so it's looking at things like, what is your hiring process? What is your promotion process? How are you evaluating? How are employees evaluated for their work output and their work effort? And is empathy part of that? And also from your customer perspective, do you have empathetic customer policies in place? Are you getting input into the product or service from your customers? Or are you just throwing something out at them that you think they need or want? So it's just kind of a series of very open-ended questions that a company can ask itself to say, are we just putting up an empathy veneer, or are we actually living this from the inside out?
Yeah. I want to read a quote. Thank you for that. That was beautiful. I'm going to find a quote on page 112 that really struck me. 122, I mean. Sorry, I'm not wearing my glasses. They broke. I stepped on them to avoid some of my daughter's Legos. Okay, So as more and more people do virtual work, it's increasingly important for managers to be purposefully empathetic, not just organically empathetic. So of course, the podcast is called Purposeful Empathy. So I 100% agree with this. But why is the virtual reality or virtual hybrid model so important now? Yeah.
Well, what's funny is I wrote the book before the pandemic. So virtual, for some industries, virtual has always been a part of it. I work in tech, and we've dealt with remote and hybrid environments forever. It feels like. For other industries, I recognize that it's very new, and it was a very sudden change. And so really this idea of being intentional about your remote workers and your hybrid workers is so important, because it's not about just hoping you have a bunch of really nice people that support each other, whether you're working from home or you're working in the office. But there's companies that do things where they try to level the playing field. And so again, if you think about it from your employee's point of view, if someone's working remote and everyone else is in the office, or part of the team's in the office, what can you do to make sure that employee feels included? So thinking about it from their point of view, well, they're never in the room with the decision makers. Everyone else knows what's going on. They have those opportunities for organic collisions in the hallway, that's changing now too. but it's finding those opportunities intentionally to include those workers that are virtual. So are you doing, a lot of companies got really creative and did things like virtual happy hours or virtual cooking classes or virtual scavenger hunts. And some of them even did, they used like a combination of Zoom and Slack to have like channels about posting vacation pictures or posting family pictures or, what's your joke of the day, and really getting everyone to feel like they're almost operating in like what some people call the metaverse, where it's like, it's not remote where you are and it's not in the office. Our interaction and our collaboration is sort of happening in this third space. Right. Mm-hmm. And so, for example, there was one company I found in my research, and this was again pre-pandemic, where whenever they'd have conference calls, they had some people in the office and some people remote. What they did to level the playing field so that the remote workers didn't feel isolated was everyone got in on Zoom. So even if they were in the same office, they actually purposely were like, okay, we're not all going to meet in the same room. We're going to make this like a level playing field for everybody. Now, that's not right for every company, but it is an example of being proactive and going, what would help the person that's remote feel included in the culture and feel included in what's going on. Some companies would do, I know I worked for a company years ago where we had a remote employee, a permanent remote employee, and, we would have them tell us about their hometown. Or, one time we did an offsite, and instead of making him come to us, we took the offsite to his city. So, we flew 4 other people out to where he is. So he felt like he was on his home turf. So different ways that you can be intentional about how do we make this inclusive for that remote worker. And I'm sure there's lots of other great ideas that have sprung up since the pandemic. But as I mentioned, the book was completed pre-pandemic. So.
Well, I love all these little examples that you're offering, and I wonder whether or not I could just dig one layer deeper. If you have specific kind of tactical advice for people who are meeting on a Zoom to kind of foster a sense of connection, despite the fact that we're not like looking into the green, piece, right? So we're not really making eye contact. Some of us are checking our email in real, at the same time,
right?
So, like, what are some practices that you're finding useful to create a sense of belonging?
I think, people that are able to make use of the chat and make use of polls and make use of the reactions with Zoom, and not everybody's using Zoom as a platform, but most people are, and I'm sure there's similar capabilities in other platforms, but being able to have those like nonverbals, being able to like collaborate in that way, in those fun ways, and also being cognizant that it could be empathetic for everyone to turn their camera off for a while. So not, it's funny because I've been on Zoom for years in my work because I work with clients all over the world. But, a lot of people aren't used to this, and Zoom fatigue, it's not Zoom fatigue, video conference fatigue is a real thing. And so sometimes it is like, some people just want to just get on the phone and have an audio conference with each other. And so it's being able to take the temperature of people in the room and checking in. And saying, hey, do we really have to do this with cameras on right now? Would everyone prefer to have cameras off and just use our sense of hearing right now so that we can feel comfortable taking notes or doing whatever we need to do?
Or stretching even.
Or stretching, exactly. Like, what are those ways that we can do that? But for me, I like having the camera on because I like seeing someone's face. It makes me feel like I'm having coffee with them. And even if we're not looking directly into the camera like this, like I'm looking at you and I feel like you're looking at me, but that's not how everyone is wired. And I think, as you probably know, that's really the fundamental of empathy, is we're not all wired the same way. And so being able to check in with people of like, hey, maybe we do half our meetings with the video on, half our meetings with the video off, but finding ways to use the technology to connect and in combination. So like I said, having Zoom and then using Slack, for example, to have little breakout rooms or water cooler rooms or things like that. Another way I've seen people kind of connect virtually with empathy is to just do walking meetings where, again, it's all audio, but everyone's like, hey, you go walk around your neighborhood. We're all going to be having this shared experience of walking around our neighborhood while we're on the call together. And so those are ways to just like shake it up a little bit and help people find a way to engage.
Yeah. Love those. So as someone who's spent the last few years studying empathy, not only how it can be helpful within the business environment, leadership, culture, brand, I wonder if you have noticed some ways in which empathy has been amplified in your personal life with your family or friends or neighbors. Just wonder.
I think my experience is probably similar to a lot of people's during the pandemic, is that while we've seen some really bad behavior and non-empathetic behavior, we've also seen some really heroic empathetic behavior of communities coming together to support a beloved small business, or, communities coming together to support someone in need or someone who's lost their job. I think for me, it's shown up in, it's always a trial when you have like a 7-year-old, and I know you can relate to that, but it's trying to practice empathy in the everyday moments, and especially in the everyday moments when you actually don't want to. And that's a sign for me that I probably need to channel it more. If I'm feeling too tired or too cranky or too whatever, it's just going to make the situation worse if I don't tap into some empathy and try to solve the problem and get to our goals with that. So I think, I don't know if that's from years of researching this and being more cognizant of my own behavior and where I lack empathy, but I'm trying to be more present about it and more, just not like shoring up my own confidence so that I can take on another person's point of view without defensiveness, and understand that we can disagree, but we can still connect through our common humanity. I think a lot of people equate empathy with agreement, and you can actually be completely empathetic with someone if you don't agree with them. And that's actually when you need to call on that empathy, is how do you find a way forward with someone that you don't agree with? So that's where I'm working on it in my personal life.
That's super profound. And I also just want to acknowledge that I see that you've practiced some self-empathy, even with our call today. You've sent me a quick email saying, I haven't had a chance to eat a bite for lunch. Can we meet, 15 minutes later? And I just love that. I loved that you did that. I wish I could have given you half an hour, downtime, but I think that's worth noting. Okay. My last question. Thank you.
Actually, I just want to add on to that, because I have found that people are giving each other more grace right now. I don't know if you've seen that. And that it actually has become easier to ask for grace, because I think people, now that the facade of our work and home life is gone and everything is blurred and people see each other's contexts, I have found, and I don't know if it's just, you might get this too, the fact that you talk about empathy, people are more empathetic with you. They don't want to be seen as the person who's not, but it's also, I have seen it though in other realms, like even just with my brand client work, where people are just being a little bit more human with each other. And that's one artifact of the pandemic that I hope doesn't go away.
Yeah, some big silver lining. Let's not make it a lining. Let's make it the whole thing. Yeah.
Let's make it the whole thing. Yeah.
Last question. I love asking this as a sort of, what's the word? Dismount kind of question. Because I never know what I'm going to get.
That.
Yeah.
I love that.
Can you think of a time in your life, and it doesn't have to be big or super poignant, but whatever comes to mind or whatever you want to share, where you have been on the receiving end of empathy and what that meant to you?
Oh my gosh. Well, having read my book, you reread my story of recovering from a near fatal brain aneurysm. And I think that entire experience was an exercise, was a masterclass in empathy for me, and not for me, but the empathy that was shown to me by so many other people in like the biggest and smallest ways. And one of the small ways that actually meant so much to me was that I was in a book club at the time that I had my brain injury. And obviously 6 weeks in the hospital, and then I was home and I actually couldn't see. I had to get corrective surgery for my eyes because the hemorrhage was so severe, it actually impacted my retinas. So even after my surgery, I had not great vision for 10 months. And so I didn't drive. I couldn't do any of that. But my book club would find books. They would make sure that they were picking books that I could get on audio, an audiobook. And this is before audiobooks really took off, make sure I could get an audiobook version. And also they would take turns driving me to the monthly book club because they knew I couldn't drive. So someone would pick me up, someone would walk with me because my night vision was really bad. And yes, they were friends, but still it was so wonderful to be able to have a weakness at the time, a vulnerability, and have someone lean into that and say we've got you, and we still want you to be a part of this because your contribution matters. So I would say that's just like, I didn't even know you were going to ask that question. And that's just something that immediately popped up for me was that empathy of understanding that I was feeling very isolated because of my injury, because I couldn't drive, I couldn't go out, I wasn't working at the time. And for them to be open to reaching out and being like, no, we still want you to be a part of this. And we're going to make sure that you're a part of this and that you can participate with us. And, whatever you need, we've got your back. And so was that also something that's nice? It was, but it was also about considering things from my point of view, which was amazing.
And that's, I think, why I love the sweetness of the question, is that we can all find a story where someone else's act of kindness and empathy really has stayed with us. It's available. It's accessible to all of us. We're born with the innate capacity to empathize. Yes. Let's just, like you said, take it to the gym and work it out like a muscle.
Totally. And let me give you one example from the workplace, because I think relevant to the book. One of my most empathetic bosses was actually a boss who had to lay off the entire marketing team in advance of a sale. And it was a merger. And so, and I say he's one of the most empathetic bosses I've ever had because of the way that he did it. So he thought through what each of us might be thinking and feeling. He supported us. He provided resources before we asked. The way he communicated the decision was very transparent and very empathetic and supportive. It wasn't just sort of a perfunctory, we have to let you go because of this merger. And it was the whole team, right? So he was losing his whole team too. And just everything he did was about thinking through the process of telling us, but thinking through beforehand, what will they need to hear? What will they need moving forward? What can I do to support them? Versus I have this information I need to share with them. And so I'm just going to set up a meeting to share it with them. And so that's a way that you can be empathetic at work and still have to make a tough business decision. But sometimes the way that you do it, if you're considering another person's point of view, makes it memorable for all the right reasons. And again, you still might have to make that tough business decision, but you can hold both truths to be the same. You can make a tough business decision and do it with empathy.
And that's the perfect place to end. Maria, it was such a great pleasure to meet you. Reach out for the Empathy Edge and have a great day.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
What if you had access to your own council of coaches to help you break free from your thinking clutter, or make an important decision, or liberate you from whatever's holding you back? At Grand Huron International, you get to choose the coach of your choice from any place, anytime. Visit grandhuroninternational.com and harness the power of on-demand coaching today.